This is Bradley Meyer with the DePIN Connection. Today we are joined by Ariel, the founder of Hivemapper. Ariel, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. I'm sure for most of the people watching, if you've watched my channel before, you know I've been involved with this project since the early stages. I guess that was back in April of 2022 when I put my first pre-orders in when they opened up, and since then have built out my own fleet and have been very involved since then. But to kick things off, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background leading up to Hivemapper?
So really my first job out of school was at Yahoo. This was kind of a fun time to be at Yahoo. So it was like 2005, 2006 timeframe. And we were at that time very competitive to Google, right? So Google had about 30% market share. We had about 30% market share. From a revenue perspective, we were roughly the same. Maybe even Yahoo was a little bit bigger back then. And I sat within the Yahoo search team. Within the Yahoo search team, I looked after all kind of local data and then ultimately ran the Yahoo Maps team. And I had a kind of a front row seat into, at least from the other side of the table, as to like what was happening with Google Maps, right? So they launched Google Maps around like 2005 timeframe. And many people think that Google Maps, really the reason they became so popular was this like really clever UI where you could just like move the map around rather than having to do like these controls, right? And that was nice and all, but really the thing that enabled them to take market share from Yahoo Maps was they start to plow ridiculous amounts of money into just collecting data on their own. And so they had the Google Street View program. They had, a whole host of other airplanes, like literally their own airplanes or contracted airplanes with incredibly expensive camera sensors to be collecting aerial overhead imagery. And then they, ultimately with the Android phone, that was a really, really large data source. So as they start to collect their own data, inevitably their map just became higher quality and fresher than Yahoo's. And Yahoo Map, primarily, we did a little bit of data collection, but really primarily we were licensing data from a whole host of providers.
Okay.
And I started to realize, I was like, wow, like if this continues on, right? If the only way to become an incredibly powerful and global map that serves literally 3 billion people per month is to just, invest massive amounts of dollars into data collection, that means that there'll only be like 1 or 2 or 3 companies that will be able to really afford that. And maybe 1 or 2, governments, quite frankly. And so, I didn't like that. I didn't like that. When you only have 2, maybe 3 players that are innovating, it's not a very competitive market. And if it's not a very competitive market, the products and services in that market are just going to become stale. And so, I mean, we're seeing that now in airplanes, right? You have like Boeing and Airbus, it's a duopoly, and it's not a great situation, right? For customers like the airlines themselves, but ultimately us as well, the flying public. And so, what the critical thing is obviously you have to build maps and do it cost effectively while maintaining quality, right? That like while maintaining quality part, people always forget about it. Like you can collect a lot of data and crowdsource it in a whole variety of ways, but if you don't do it while maintaining quality, then you're just not going to build a viable map that can legitimately serve, billions of people all over the world and vehicles and all that kind of stuff. So, long story short, I'll kind of wrap up here. 2015, like fast forward 2015, 2016 timeframe, started Hivemapper. There was like all of these kind of false starts. We went down a lot of blind alleys. There were some very, very dark days. We ultimately figured it out, kind of put all the different pieces together to get us to where we're at today in terms of, I think we're about 25% global map coverage. Many, many, many thousands of people all over the world collecting data. We have these AI trainers, and we'll talk more about that. So, the long story is I think we've kind of nailed it. There's still a lot of work to be done, clearly, but that's kind of like my background and kind of how I came to this.
I knew you had extensive history in mapping, right? So this is something that it's kind of been a lifelong journey, really. So yeah. Hivemapper is your baby. I think there's probably a lot of people that don't realize that it goes back further than just 2022, moving into the DePIN space. But you guys have obviously hit some serious milestones. But before we get into that, I mean, I think most people do understand what Hivemapper is, but if you want to, give us a little bit of a summary of what exactly Hivemapper is doing.
So there's, at a very high level, there's three major parts of building a map. There's collecting the data, right? Like basically the raw ingredients, in our case is primarily the imagery and the location data coming off of these dashcam devices. So you buy this dashcam device, it's kind of a purpose-built device, for mapping. And you drive like you normally do, right? And so that imagery are effectively the eyes of this mapping engine that we built. And then there's processing, and there's obviously automated processing that is extracting out all of the relevant pieces of information from the imagery, right? An image on its own is like, it's interesting, but it's not very valuable, quite frankly. The interesting and valuable information is embedded within those pixels and being able to extract out, okay, that's a 35-mile-per-hour speed limit sign. Okay, there's road construction on this road that is one way, and this road, used to have 3 lanes, and now it has only available 1 lane because there's construction in the 2 right-hand lanes. That is the kind of really, really valuable information that impacts navigation, that impacts your quality and speed of navigation. So that is what the processing engine, the Map AI engine, is effectively doing. And then you supplement that with human beings, these AI trainers that are both training the models and doing QA, right? So, okay, now you have real data products, but you need to package those data products into things that actual customers can use, right? And talk a little bit about the 3 markets that we're going after. So the first market that we're going after is businesses, so B2B, whether it be a logistic company, whether it be a local government company, whether it be transportation, mobility, other mapping companies, et cetera. Today, Google Maps has millions of different software developers, applications, et cetera, that utilize Google Maps inside of their product. And that's one market that we're going after. That's quite interesting. The second market is autonomous vehicles. This isn't just like robo-taxis, like a Waymo or a Cruise, but also, if you go out and buy a Ford today, like a Ford F-150 as an example, it comes with this thing called Blue Cruise that will drive the pickup truck, the Ford F-150, on most highways in America, right? So that's a form of autonomous driving, and that absolutely requires incredibly fresh maps as a critical ingredient into that capability. And then the third, so we're competitive in that market as well. And then the third market that we're not yet competitive in, we don't have a product in, quite frankly, is consumer navigation. But we still think there's a lot to do in consumer navigation. Like there hasn't been a ton of innovation in the last 10 or 12 years. And so we think that with this new data collection system that we've built, that we can actually bring something to bear there.
Yeah, I mean, I like that you guys are going after different verticals or different types of revenue to kind of spread out a little bit, so you don't have all your eggs in one basket. So that's awesome. And you guys, I mean, look, we've had incredible success. Looking at some of the milestones, you just had your quarterly report that came out. You did mention I think we've gotten up to 25% of the world's roads mapped at this point. But looking at Q2 specifically, looking at some of these figures, 268 million kilometers mapped just in that quarter, 607 million AI trainer reviews, and over 5,600 cams shipped in Q2. And speaking of the world's roads maps, right? I know this is something that we paid a lot of attention to early on. It was a really cool metric to look at. But in listening to some of the AMAs and being tuned into what the project's doing, seems like that there's less attention being paid to that and more attention being paid to other things based on customer feedback, which is what you all should be doing. So I'm always happy to hear that you guys are taking feedback from the field and integrating that into your plan moving forward. So I'm curious, compared to when you first started, and based on what you've learned over the last couple of years, especially with the data and everything, how has your focus shifted over time to where we are today?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, look, we've always been very religious about the need for a passive contributor experience. And if anything, that level of intensity around that objective has only increased. Because what the customers absolutely need, what's really, really interesting and really valuable, and I think you kind of hinted at this, is like, absolute coverage is interesting. In other words, like we've covered now 25% of the global roads. That's definitely interesting. But even more interesting is, okay, let's say for a given region, like a Los Angeles or a London or a Paris, how much of that region are you covering every single month, right? Is the really interesting question for a lot of the customers that we're talking to. And in some cases, it could even be weekly, right? I don't think every single road needs to be covered weekly, like in a region like Los Angeles. There are definitely certain roads that absolutely do, and in some cases you want them multiple times per day. But that level of kind of granularity is something that we're spending a lot more time in terms of understanding all the critical metrics and then driving, the incentives around those metrics and so forth. But we've talked about this a lot, and it's been a little bit of a fun, interesting, and maybe even controversial topic, you cannot achieve that level of frequency or freshness with a very active, and I'm going to define active, mapper base, right?
Yeah.
Because people will just give up. The expected earnings or rewards around that are just like ridiculous. So what you really need is just people who are doing those roads or driving those roads. Let's just take LA. I think there's about 100,000 road kilometers in the LA region for us. You just need people who are just like automatically driving those roads, which tends to be many commercial vehicles, right? And we'll talk a little bit about why that's important. That doesn't mean that there's not a role for we have a whole bunch of bursts in like LA right now. There's some other locations as well where there's a whole bunch. And the people who do that are like the super, super engaged folks around the Hivemapper community. And that's wonderful, right? And so there's room for both, right? There's room for the super engaged, people who go out and do the bursts the moment they pop up. And you also need the commercial fleets that are just 100% passive, just going out there and driving because driving is their business.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. And I did pull this up. I thought it was timely. I mean, I have a good buddy that I grew up with, my buddy Zach. His girlfriend was in LA, and she sent this screenshot, and I was blown away. You mentioned bursts. I don't know if you want to touch on that real quickly.
Yeah, so bursts are where there's a specific need for new mapping to occur at that location. And so what's happening with bursts is like you're trying to fill in a gap that exists in the map, right? Or you're trying to get more recent imagery from that specific location because you're potentially missing something that has occurred since you last saw it. And so you basically put these locations down and then boom, there you go.
Gotcha.
So in the case of LA right now, there's actually a couple different things going on. There's definitely some customers that have a whole bunch of stuff that have been deployed there, which is cool, or been activated there. So that's cool. And we're trying to improve what we refer to as recall. So recall is if you've seen a location, if you've driven down a road, and let's say I'm just making this number up, but let's say there's 20 different objects that you want on that road, right? Speed limit signs, stop signs, turn restriction, whatever. Your recall percent is okay, how many of those did you actually map, right? Mm-hmm. If you got 10 of the 20, 50% recall, that's kind of crappy.
Yeah.
But if you get 18 out of 20, that's pretty solid. It is unlikely that you'll get 100%, from just one pass. And that's kind of built into the way that Hivemapper works. Is like, we don't need 100%, and that we'll see that drive or those signs multiple times. And that's really ideal, is being able to see the signs multiple times from multiple dash cams, that are potentially driving in slightly different patterns and different angles.
Makes sense. And that's something that, I've heard you touch on several times is, getting more shots at capturing that imagery. And one of the big differentiators between you guys and say a Google is that, Google might pass a spot once a year, once every 2 years, depending on the area, maybe, once every 10 years in more rural areas. you guys get more shots on target. So, by going past that same location multiple times, you will over time be able to capture all that data. So you have mentioned a bunch, the word passive, right? And that kind of leads me into the next thing I want to talk about, which is, I think we're at this inflection point right now where we're moving to this next chapter, and the project's evolving with the next generation of dashcam that's coming. Because the original dashcam, the HTC, I will say, being a contributor from the very beginning, it has gotten a lot easier to contribute over time. You guys have shipped a lot of updates to the app, and it has become a much easier process. But the B is really going to allow us to move into a truly passive experience as a contributor. It's also going to allow us to get into the fleets, the commercial fleets like you talked about. But I do want to bring up the next generation of dashcam that's coming soon. And if you want to talk to the features and why that's so important for the project.
Yeah, it is. It's a really important product for us. It's a hard product to build, quite frankly, but it is very important. I think what you said is 100% correct, that the Hivemapper dashcam, as well as the Hivemapper dashcam S model, there's been a ton of improvements to them. So it's definitely easier. It's pretty easy. But the holy grail is you buy the device, you install it, takes you 10 minutes to install, you make sure the mount is okay, etc. And inside of that is actually an LTE module, and basically the entire mapping process, right? We talked about the map AI, the processing phase of building a map. All of that occurs on the device. And that's really important from multiple perspectives. One is it can then determine what it actually sends up, right? Like if it says, okay, look, I've mapped out, this road and, there's no new changes. Okay. It doesn't have to send anything. Okay. It's still really, really valuable information, just knowing the fact that there has been no changes, or if there are changes, it can just send up those changes, right? Like, okay, this sign has changed, that sign has changed. There's this new thing, that new thing, whatever it is. And it just sends up that piece of information. So in addition to today, where we basically upload like all the imagery, it's a ton. Yeah. And so it incurs this additional cost, whether it be on, your phone or your Wi-Fi thing at home, or just like waiting for all those downloads to occur. It adds friction to the process, and friction is the enemy of passive. And so that's a very, very important capability that this device has. It will also have LTE, which I think I shared. And that basically means is you don't ever have to connect to the device, right? It will then just automatically upload. If it needs a new firmware, it'll pull the firmware down. It'll automatically install the firmware. So from a driver perspective, there's really no like babysitting the device at all, which is beautiful. And what that means is it opens us up to basically sell this device into commercial fleets, right? There is no way you can sell the existing devices into commercial fleets. We tried.
Yeah.
I think you probably tried as well, right?
Yeah. I mean, I had some success, but there's certainly a lot of workarounds and a lot of involvement on my part. So, yeah, I mean, look, this is absolutely critical. Okay. It's going to be a more passive, truly passive process. You then have the edge processing like you talked about. So I think there's a couple of different, parts of that. For one, you can identify the imagery that really needs to be uploaded, the imagery that's useful, that's going to decrease the amount of data that's being uploaded. That's going to help with the LTE plans, I would imagine. But it's also going to give you more options as far as, identifying useful information so that the data itself is consumable closer to the point of collection, as opposed to, uploading, then having to sort, sift through everything and do the processing on the back end. So I think it helps from a participation standpoint, but also on the back end, when it's customer facing, it's going to, allow you to generate revenue easier. Another thing though, that you didn't touch on is, what about the data quality improvements? Because there are additional capabilities with this model versus the HTC, right? As far as the data quality itself.
Yeah. So this device has, so there's 3 cameras on it. So there's a main imager, the camera, full high resolution 4K imagery plus 4K video from the main camera system that sits in the middle of the device. And then you have this pair of stereo depth cameras. And stereo depth cameras enables us to then position those objects that we detect with the main camera very, very accurately from very long distances, right? So what does that mean? So it means is we can tell you exactly where that stop sign is located, a speed limit sign or turn restriction sign, etc., even if you're 40, 50 meters away from that actual object, from that actual sign. And so that is critical, right? Like if you have a map and all you can say is like, yeah, I know there's a stop sign, it's somewhere around here, that's not very helpful because you need to know that where the sign is so that you can then determine what drive path it's associated to, right? Like if you could have one lane effectively that has a turn restriction sign, that lane basically means is you cannot make a left-hand turn from there, but the lane over, you can actually make a left-hand turn or you can make a U-turn from that, but not that lane, right? So it's very, very, very specific. And if you can't accurately position those objects, then you can't determine what drive path it's associated to without like a human intervention, which is obviously super costly. And so that is a really critical capability that this device has. And we made some changes to the stereo depth cameras. We had it on the S model, not the basic Hivemapper dashcam model. So we learned a ton in terms of what worked and what didn't work in terms of those stereo depth cameras. And we extended what's referred to as the baseline. That basically just means the distance between those two stereos so that we can make it longer. And so that's why the device is significantly wider than the S model. And we also upped the resolution on those stereo depth cameras so that we could get much more precise positioning with those. The other thing that we improved was the actual GNSS module itself. So this is a much more capable GNSS module. And it also opens us up to use kind of some third-party RTK, PPK, some other things that we're kind of playing around with that will enable us to correct the GNSS, because GNSS will never be perfect, right? Like just the straight GNSS, like you'll always have issues with it. And so then you have to kind of combine the GNSS signal that you're getting with your IMU data, with the imagery data, with some third-party sources to then improve or correct the GNSS positioning.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I mean, look, it sounds like we're gonna be light years ahead with this new model. And look, the HTC got us to where we are. I mean, obviously you guys have generated revenue. We've made a lot of progress, but to get into this next chapter and really blow the door open for revenue and the potential customers, I think this is going to be completely necessary. Do you have so the LTE plans, now I know there's not really any info yet. I think you said by the end of August, you should have some more info. Part of that is uploading less imagery will be helpful in getting the cost of those plans down. But do you have anything you can share on that right now?
Yeah, I'll share a little bit. So look, it really depends on where you live is the short version. Okay. So the good news, if you live in Europe, it's actually really easy. Okay. And what I mean by easy is we do not have to work with the individual wireless carriers in Europe to certify the device. And so that means is that in this LTE device ships to Europe, you can just take a SIM card, pop it in there, and it should work, right? We haven't tested it. That's why I want to say it should work, but the specific module, the LTE module that we are utilizing is actually quite expensive. And the reason we chose that one was because we wanted a lot of flexibility, right? And so Europe is good news. If you live in US, Australia, Canada, Mexico, and some of the Asian countries, it's less good news. What do I mean by that? It means we have to work with carriers in those specific countries and basically work through a certification process with those carriers. So we have to actually send them the device. They have to go test the device. We have to send them all the specs on the module that we're using, the LTE module. And then they come back and say, you're good to go. It's certified. Boom, we can start to use it. So in the US, we're working actively with T-Mobile. One is their certification process seems to be the most straightforward. And they've been helpful, in terms of just getting back to us and all that kind of stuff. And then, especially for the Hivemapper community, we know there's a lot of folks that want to use the Helium LTE SIM card, which is awesome. We love them. And so they'll only be able to do that if we certify on T-Mobile, right? And so, for Australia and Canada and Mexico and some of the other Asian countries, there's still more work to be done before I can feel confident kind of sharing, the detailed plans on that. But fair. Canada is for sure a priority. And so is Australia.
Okay. That's fair. Man, manufacturing is hard. You guys are doing two of the hardest things you can do. Build a map. Building a map is very difficult. And then manufacturing on top of that. So I'm sure you have your hands full, man. So the one other thing, the HTC versus the B as far as rewards go, and this was an MIP that was put in place months ago, earlier this year, that because of the amount of edge processing that the B can do, there will be additional rewards associated with the B and the LTE version especially. Is that correct?
Yes, okay. Definitely. I mean, I think so broadly, what you just said is 100% correct, that the B will have better rewards than the previous generation. And, that's not just us trying to get upgrades and stuff like that. It is basically taking over the vast majority of the map AI processing that occurs today, right? And it's putting that onto the device. And so it just makes sense, right? I don't think there's anything controversial about that. Now, with the LTE device, yes, we do think that one should earn more. There is a question as to if you have a Wi-Fi device and that Wi-Fi device is connected to your mobile phone, and your mobile phone is, basically uploading all that data in real time, what's the difference? I think that's a fair question. And so I think we're going to have to look at that specific, issue or edge case a little bit more carefully.
That makes sense. And then as far as shipping timeline, this is something that's come up a lot. I mean, you guys said Q3, and I think there's a lot of people in the community that automatically assume July. Technically, you guys have till the end of Q3, which would be end of September to start shipping. That doesn't mean you're going to be in full production. It sounds like, based on some of the AMAs, et cetera, and this is kind of my expectation from the beginning, was that October, November, December, especially moving into 2025, is when we could expect to see full production. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, that's broadly correct. The thing that is adding some additional challenges over the previous device is this device. Well, there's two broad categories. One is that because we're now selling into commercial fleets, and some of these commercial fleets are quite large, I think just the level of quality expectation that these businesses have is quite high, right? And related to that is the device will also support what we refer to as AI events, right? And so, in other words, if you have a commercial fleet and your driver is driving like an idiot and he's tailing somebody, we know that, right? Because we know the distance to the vehicle in front of it. We know the fact that there is a vehicle in front of it. And so we can then tell the driver, and this is all through the stereo depth cameras and the map AI and all that type of stuff. We can now tell the fleet owner, hey, this driver over here, Mike or whatever, is driving like a moron. Okay. That's really valuable to them. And so there's I think 4 or 5 different events that will initially go out, and getting those right and making sure they work all the freaking time is just hard. And it adds a layer of complexity, and it adds additional testing. And so I think this one will take us a little bit longer to do because of that commercial fleet use case.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, look, people, in the crypto industry, we tend to be a little bit more techie and probably more willing to roll with the punches, if you will. But some of these big commercial fleets, you get in with a big business, you got to get it right, because you screw up that relationship and you might not be able to get back in the door with them. So it is absolutely critical that you get it right the first time. as far as production goes, and this is something else you guys touched on the AMA, the HDCs, you guys got to a point where you're getting 100 to 150 HDCs a day manufactured. Your goal is to get to 3 to 5 times that with the B, and doing some math, that would put us at 9,000 Bs per month on the low end, as much as maybe 20,000 on the high end. But the thing I'm curious about is, what are you guys doing differently from a manufacturing standpoint to be able to scale to those numbers?
Yeah. So we looked at like every station. Let's just take a very simple, there's all these different stations that the device goes through, right? Let's just take one of the stations, make it simple for folks, and then we can go into some of the more technical ones. But like literally the boxing is like a person there with like, folding the box, inserting the foam, right, and then inserting all the parts, etc. And that was a person doing that. And if we had designed the box to be folded and then ultimately closed by a robot, and you can do that, right? Or taking the time to design that boxing process so that it could be done by a robot, you basically remove that person from the mix, and then you take that down from, let's say, 5 or 7 minutes to 30 seconds, okay? And so that's a very clear example of how we're designing and building the entire assembly process to be done by robots and therefore faster. And then also just lower the cost effectively from an assembly perspective. But we've literally gone through every single station and said okay, how do we reduce the hands-on time, which obviously is costly from a human perspective, but also slows everything down. And creates it more error prone, right? So for example, there was like a gluing process on the S, right? That's all removed now. There's no glue. It's literally like, the top part, the bottom part, they seal with this gasket that already comes pre-installed on it. And then there's 6 different screws. So the robot just comes, closes it up, and then literally another robot comes. Actually, I think it's the same robot comes and actually, does all the screwing for it.
Okay.
So that's example of like where, that entire process has gone from, maybe like 8 to 10 minutes down to like, a minute or 2.
Okay.
So, it's very like tedious technical work, but if you do it and you design things with, the intention for this thing to be manufactured at scale, then you can achieve it. Maybe just more broadly, like we're building our manufacturing assembly line right now to, scale to like 150,000, 200,000 per year. If we go beyond that, like to like, let's say 500,000 to 1 million, then there's kind of another layer of automation, but you don't want to spend all that capital investment up front. Unless you're really, really confident you're going to get to like 500,000 to 1 million a year.
That makes sense. I mean, that was what I was going to say is, when we started with HDC, it was kind of an unknown. The demand was unknown. So I would imagine putting these automated systems in place, like, it'll save money in the long run, but the capital investment up front, I'm sure, is quite large for some of these changes that you've made. So knowing now that the demand is there, you can make those types of capital investments to get to where we are. So that all makes sense. So talking about fleets, okay, because I know you guys are putting a lot of emphasis on this, and I get why you're doing it. I mean, if you're with the right types of fleets, they're going to get the coverage you need, right? And now that you're going to have a passive product, you can absolutely do that. But curious, like, what size fleets are you going after? What types of businesses are you targeting for that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, look, in this market, there's existing players, right? And so most of those existing players have tended to go towards larger fleets, like in other words, 500, 750 and above, and then work to get those fleets into 3 to 5 year contracts, right? So it could be like a large trucking company. It could be a delivery company. It could be like a pest control business with, 500 vehicles in Southern California, et cetera. We're definitely much more focused on slightly smaller fleets. So like, 10 vehicles all the way up to like 400, 500 vehicles. And so like there's a business that's actually a traveling nurse business and I think they have about 300 vehicles. They've bought into the commercial fleets product, a business that has actually two different parts. They have a lawn fertilizing business, and then they have a pest control business out on the East Coast of the U.S. So those are the kinds of businesses that we're focused on. We're not going into these customers and claiming we have, like if you go to like somebody like a Samsara or something like that, they got, literally like a feature list 1,000, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
For a lot of those customers, they don't need all that, right? And so why pay the premium for all those crazy features when you don't have to? And then B, why pay, why commit to a 3 or 5 year contract? That's a long time, right?
Sure.
And so our value prop is, look, you buy this hardware device, you got to obviously pay for it. You can use all the base features for free, right? If you start to use these, capabilities and features that we provide, very, very significant quantities, and then yes, there is a monthly fee, but there's no annual contract, right? There's not, so there's no 3-year contract and there's no annual contract, right? So you can like jump into, activate them on half of your devices, activate them on all your devices, etc. And we'll share more information about how this works. But like, I think for the core, like if you just have a small fleet of 10, 15, 20 vehicles, I think you should be doing totally fine with just paying for the device and obviously paying for the LTE, but not having to pay any for the premium features on top of it.
Okay. That makes sense. I think the sweet spot of being, 10 up to 400, because once you, to your point, once you get above 400, they probably are trying to go for maybe more features, if you will, for their fleet. So, but under that size, I think what you guys will be able to offer will be able to, hit what they're looking for. And I think it does something else too, in that it's removes the risk of individual contributors that might fluctuate more with market conditions, right? Because obviously we know crypto is very volatile, and having fleets where maybe the crypto aspect is secondary and they're more worried about the features of the dash cam itself and what it can do for their fleet. Now that crypto part becomes secondary, and it reduces the risk of, market conditions and the turbulence of crypto.
Yeah. That is definitely a reason. That wasn't the primary reason that we did it. The primary reason we really did and focus on commercial fleets and decided, hey, this is really important, is because of the frequency, right? Like we really felt like to get that frequency up, that we needed commercial fleets because they just drive so much is the bottom line. Yeah. And so that was really, reason number one. Reason number two is exactly what you just said was, crypto is very emotional. And so, it goes up, goes down. Thankfully, even though the markets have been going, been down, at least that we haven't seen a significant reduction in weekly active drivers. If anything, they're going up. And the weekly productivity of drivers is still strong. So, we've been able to kind of withstand some of these market fluctuations quite effectively. But it is a risk, and it's a risk that we need to address.
For sure. What do you mean people in crypto are emotional, man? What are you talking about? You said like 2 minutes in Discord, you'll know what we're talking about. But I do think it's important too. I mean, I have seen some stuff in the community. There's people that are concerned because, there has been a lot of talk about commercial fleets, and there are a lot of individual contributors, entrepreneurial fleets like myself, and people are concerned that you guys are trying to get away from that completely. And I want you to speak to that, and also what you see as an ideal mix of commercial fleets versus the type of contributor that we had up to this point.
Don't hold me to this, but I think the right mixture is roughly 60-40, 70-30. So in other words, 60% commercial fleets, 40%, entrepreneurial fleets, and, just everyday consumers. So I think that's roughly the right mix. I think it'll take us some time to get there. I don't think it'll happen overnight. But I also just think, like, why hide this, right? Like, a lot of people are like, oh, don't share this with the community. I was like, no, like this is not, trying to tell the community like, we don't want you. is just saying to the community that in order for the project to achieve its goals, right, and get to the kind of scale that we believe is necessary, that this is additive and not trying to take away stuff from the individual consumer. Like if you just look at all of these bursts that have kind of gone out, they're now all over the US. There's a lot in Southern California. I can't imagine that most commercial fleet drivers would do that, sorry, just drive around kind of the way that some of these people are driving around. And so I think you lose a lot if you don't have those individual consumers who are just like having fun, enjoying, also there to make honey, whatever it is. But there's something more than just like, hey, this driver is like a sensor in my car.
Yeah. Well, and I would say too, with the commercial fleets, there are use cases where you need to have super refreshed imagery where they're going to be critical, right? But for the individual contributors, there might be use cases where you only need it updated once a month and be able to hit roads that you wouldn't be able to get otherwise through a commercial fleet. So I think it is important to have a mix for sure. And I do want to talk about the demand side though. And when I talk about demand, I'm talking about the customer and revenue coming through. So you released a case study recently highlighting a partnership with Here Technologies. I do want to talk about that, but I want to talk about the types of data that's sold because, you have image data, right? And then you have map features. And I do want to pull up actually the new look of the Hivemapper site. So you can see now you have these traffic signals. You've also got the stop signs, different signs that are listed on here. You guys just launched this pretty recently, but as far as
can you just flip the color? If you go to the lower right-hand corner, I think it'll just be easier to see. Yeah, there you go.
Like to the white, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah, the white, I think, is a little bit easier to see them.
Sure.
Yeah.
So really, I want you to speak to the different types of data, whether it's image data versus the feature and the other products that you guys are looking to launch.
Yeah, I mean, if I look forward, I mean, what we hear from customers is, imagery is important, imagery is valuable, especially in Scout and stuff like that, which we can talk about. But what is even more valuable is what you're seeing right there, which are those map features, right? Because that's the actual information. And today I think there's like 5 or 6 of them. So speed limit signs, stop signs, turn restrictions, traffic lights, whatever. Yeah, ultimately there's probably like 200 of them that you want on the map, right? So like red camera lights, stop camera lights, road construction, parking restrictions, all this, gas prices, etc. Right? There's just an incredible amount that the Map AI engine is still working on detecting those at very, very high quality levels and then ultimately placing them on the map. So when we walk into customers, a lot of the conversations is, oh, what about that one? Oh, what about that one? What about this one? I mean, we'll get to them all. We don't have them all yet, but that is the thing. If I think about like what is the bottleneck of revenue and growth today, it is that, right? Like in other words, how do you increase the menu of products from like 5 or 6 map features to like 200 or 300, right? And do that at scale and stuff like that. That is a huge unlock for us. And, I think we hired a lot of new software engineers in the last month or so. And so I think you'll start to see some of that unlock happen here in the coming months on that.
Okay.
You even take like so we in Scout, a lot of customers come in and they're looking for, for example, I want to know where all of the fire hydrants are in the city of Chicago, right? And I want to understand the condition of all of those different fire hydrants in the city of Chicago. Okay, that's a real use case, by the way.
Yeah,
like people do that, and it's very, very manual and very, very, very tedious today. So sure, today we provide imagery. You can tell us where you think those locations are. Ultimately, what they really want is for us to go tell them where they are, right? Like in other words, we're automatically detecting those from the imagery, and then boom, we come in and show them, here are the 18,000 fire hydrants that we've detected throughout the city of Chicago. And then boom, here's the ones that we've automatically detected have potential issues with them, right? That you can go and inspect, yourself with the associated imagery. That's a lot more valuable than just imagery.
Yeah.
And so, the way Scout will start to dramatically improve is when you can just search for things, right? You can search for tell me about all the residential construction happening in the city of Santa Monica right now, and tell me about whether or not any of these are almost finished, right? Like that's data that exists in the imagery, right? You have to obviously extract it out, et cetera, whatever. It's not simple, but that is imagery that we're collecting every single day. And so that's incredibly powerful, right? Like once you can do that kind of stuff, the number of customers, number of use cases expands dramatically, and the product just becomes easier to use. You're not sitting there going after looking at every single, location and every single image for every location.
Let's talk about the case study. So Here Technologies, that was one that you recently put that case study out about. So if you want to talk about that, I believe that you've been working on that partnership for a while now.
Yeah, I mean, I've known them for a while just because like I've been in the mapping industry for a while and kind of know them well. And they're owned by the large car manufacturers, primarily German car manufacturers. And so, their maps ultimately sit inside of many of the German vehicles. And then also their maps are being utilized for things like ADAS, which is assisted driving capabilities and so forth. And so, we started this partnership and it's been going incredibly well. They coming back for more and more, and we're looking for ways to kind of expand it, beyond just imagery. That won't probably happen until like later this year, early next year. There's still like a data eval process that needs to happen with them.
One of the other things you guys mentioned, because we have really good footprint in the US and Europe, and it sounds like Asia, Southeast Asia specifically, is something you guys are really interested in moving into. Is that you identified there as a market there? Do you have specific customers that are kind of pushing that forward, or what's the reasoning behind that?
Yeah, we definitely have customers in Asia. I will say this, like in terms of if I just have to prioritize it, the three markets that are the most important for us right now is US, Europe, Canada, like a couple of countries in the Middle East, like UAE and Saudi Arabia, and then Australia. Like those are all really, really important, given the specific customer, the specific large customers that we're focused on. Those are all really important. And so there are some Asian markets like Japan, Korea, the Philippines that are also, we've done very well there from a coverage perspective. So I don't feel the urgency to like, add more and more and more just because we've already done pretty well there. The thing that we're working on now is like making sure that the demand side of the equation comes into play for Asia as well.
Gotcha. That makes sense. One question I do have is, with all the different, revenue streams that you're going after, what do you see as the total addressable market for Hivemapper? Obviously right now that might be different, but now and moving forward, what do you think the total addressable market is revenue wise?
Look, if you look at the three, let's go back to like the three categories or three markets, right? So one is B2B. We gave a whole bunch of different, customer examples of who falls into B2B today. From a car vehicle perspective, or automotive sector, I should say, is there's like 70 to 90 million vehicles that get sold every single year. Today, only really the high-end cars have the self-driving capabilities where the car will automatically drive itself under certain scenarios and circumstances. But moving forward, 2, 3, 4 years from now, I suspect 100% of new vehicles, right? And all of those vehicles absolutely require some sort of incredibly fresh map as a key ingredient into those self-driving capabilities. And so I think that automotive and self-driving will be the largest market for us. It will also take the longest to kind of, fully unravel or fully reveal itself in terms of the, significantly large revenue streams. That's just because, the number of cars that where it gets interesting has a turnover. There's 1.2 billion cars in the world, but there's only 70 to 90 new million cars that actually come into the marketplace every single year. So it will take some time. But that one is by far the biggest. The last one, which is the consumer navigation app, that's roughly $15 to $20 billion per year. So you got to get up obviously to like 1 billion, 2 billion users to be able to monetize at that level. But, it is there. And I don't think Google has done a particularly amazing job at monetizing that product. So I think there's a lot of room to still monetize that thing. So 5 to 7 for the first one, 5 to 7 billion a year for the first one. Upwards of 30 to 40 billion for the automotive, and then 15 to 20 billion on the consumer navigation.
Okay. I mean, that's some real revenue, man, that you can tap into for sure. So that's exciting, man. That's one of the questions I always have is, what's the total addressable market to move into? Obviously, you can do things that other people can't do too. So there are markets where you can probably grab very substantial market share just because no one else can offer it.
And I think that there's other monetization solutions that will also bring just beyond those markets, right? So like on the fleet side, there will be a fee for it if you start to use it excessively. So I think that you got to think a little bit more broadly as well beyond that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. One of the things that, the community has been discussing is token distributions, rewards, et cetera. I don't want to harp on this too much, but you've been very vocal about the point and very open about the fact that you haven't sold any tokens that have been granted to you. That's correct, right?
That is correct.
Okay. The thing I do want to discuss really is the MIPs, right? So, I try to be very pragmatic and level-headed in the community. I know not everyone is the same way, but some of the MIPs, I will say that have reduced rewards over the last 6 months or so. I do agree with the concept behind them and pushing the project forward. My constructive criticism has been that in some cases, I think it's happened a little bit too aggressively and too quickly. Would have liked to have seen some of that done more gradually, but I do want to, have you speak to that. And I know that you said at times the rewards have been probably too aggressive. I wouldn't disagree with that, and it's unsustainable. So just, want to open it up for you to speak to some of the MIPs and, the reduction in rewards that we've seen.
So I think some people think that we went into this, with the intent to dramatically reduce rewards. That wasn't the primary objective at all. The primary objective was to address the specific underlying issues. So for example, side cameras, right? And you start to look at side camera data, and then you looked at the value that was being generated from those side cameras, especially in certain types of roads. And it was just like, this is dumb. There's just no value here. And that one in my view, I think that, should have happened a long time ago. And so, for whatever, there was just priority, whatever, didn't ever happen. But it was really, there were truck drivers who would be like, I don't really understand what value my side camera is providing the network on, Highway 80 in the middle of, Wyoming or Nebraska or wherever, right? So, I think that one, should have happened and should have happened a long time ago. But there were others that I agree with you that we moved quickly. Usually what happens is there's no conspiracy theory here. Is we're okay, we got to go fix all these issues. They've been accumulating. Let's just go fix them. And, we then go, roll out the MIPs, and then we're okay, we're done now. And let's go after the next thing that we have to go solve, right? Whether it be a hardware thing or a customer thing or a product thing, whatever it is. So it's not it's just kind of the way that we operate. And people can argue it's bad. We should do this over an extended period of time, et cetera. I get it, but it was not any conspiracy theory to tank rewards or anything like that. It was literally just trying to address the individual problems that we kept seeing that had kind of accumulated over an extended period of time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Again, I think the thought process behind them changing the regional progress to continue raising the bar so that we get more coverage and a higher refresh rate. All that makes sense. Brings value to the network.
I agree with you. That specific one probably should have been, and that, that's partially my bad, should have been rolled out over a longer period of time because it was a little bit jarring.
Yeah. Well, here's the other thing though. We know in the crypto space, people don't tend to be the most patient, right? And we're in a, you got to kind of have a tech startup mindset where there's going to be some peaks and valleys. You're going to roll with the punches. I mean, part of being in the DePIN space in general is like exciting. Like you're on the front end of something big, and we're building something, and you get to be a part of that, right? So that kind of comes with the territory. So I think you guys are focused on the right things. I don't think anyone can argue you're working tirelessly around the clock, really focused on driving demand, getting new features out, and getting revenue through the door. I mean, that's what matters more than anything, because you can have all the data in the world. You can have, build on decentralized infrastructure with a DePIN project. If no one's using the network, no one's buying the data, then none of that actually matters. So, yeah. So I do appreciate your hard work ethic. And, the thing with the reward system is, as more cameras ship, as we get more progress up, I mean, we'll start to see that recover. And I think, moving forward with MIPs, you live and you learn. So yeah. I think, making more gradual changes over time, moving forward, I think would be a good move. But look, man, you guys are doing a kick-ass job, and I think the numbers show.
I appreciate it. I will say this in terms of the patience. Like if you just look at the history of technology, that especially in businesses that are two-sided network or multi-sided network, they take a while to mature, but then the value accrual ends up in the last like 10%, right? Does that make sense? So, it looks, look, everybody thought Uber was a crappy business, right? For a long time, right? People thought Facebook was a crappy business, right? There was a lot of these businesses that appear to be like really crappy, or like would never scale, or would never make money, or like there was 1,000 things, right? They just take a while to really mature. And I think that's the question. It's not just us, but like wireless, what Helium is doing as well, and many others in the DePIN space, they take time. And that is something that, the crypto market is always looking for like the shiny new toy.
Yeah. No doubt.
And, that's the open question, right? Around crypto and DePIN.
Yeah, I agree. But I think you guys are making strides, and we're seeing constant progress. I mean, that's what you want to see, right? Is pushing out updates, launching new tools, getting a new dash cam out there to push the project forward into this next chapter. I mean, you guys are doing the right things. I know we're a little bit over here, but is there anything you want to add? Any new features coming out? Any new customers that you're working on? Anything else that you want to add before we cut off?
There's a lot of new big customers that we're starting. Some of these customers have been working with for, 9, 10, 12, 18 months in some cases. So, they're starting to, contracts are getting signed, and, there's obviously still a technical integration that needs to happen, and there's a scaling part that needs to happen as well. But, these things are starting to kind of fall into place. It will take some time for it all to show up in the numbers, et cetera, but it's all kind of happening. And so, the same thing on Scout, like I think I shared a little bit in terms of just the latent demand that we're seeing for that is actually quite exciting. And now it's okay, how do we expand that, right? How do we take that from, 20, 30, smaller customers, expand those customers, go to 60 customers, go to 100 customers, like that kind of stuff. So that's a lot of like the scaling and automation that we're currently working on.
Love it. Yeah. You're moving in the right direction. So, Ariel, I appreciate you coming on today, man. Great discussion. Thanks for staying on a little long. I know you're super busy and probably running late to your next meeting, so I appreciate you staying on with me.
No worries. This has been fun, Brad. Appreciate it, man.
All right. Take care.